Hello, I'm Richard Bryant, Executive Director of Musco Center for the Arts at Chapman University. Welcome back to our At the Musco online series, where you can connect in real time with real people, faculty, students, professional artists, and one another, all engaged in what we call the art of community. Our At the Musco Ever a Dancer programs put long-lived dance practitioners in conversation with others about cultural equity, social justice, representation, and creative pursuits. In this evening's event, Musco Center and the Department of Dance at the College of Performing Arts are honored to welcome a lineup of seasoned performers, choreographers, and educators who have collectively been part of more than 28 iconic Broadway and touring musical productions. We anticipate our guests will have plenty to discuss about their careers, personal lives, and transitions as people of color in the musical theater industry. We look forward to your questions and comments for these truly industry insiders. And now here's your host, Musco Center's Napoleon Gladney.
Good evening and welcome to the first Ever a Dancer online conversation of the fall in partnership with the Department of Dance at the College of Performing Arts at Chapman University. This is an At the Musco online event putting dance at the center of the conversation. I'm Napoleon, your host this evening. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Please take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe to Musco Center on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also join our email list for updates on new happenings and online events at muscocenter.org. We will be announcing some new online events, including conversations with some world-renowned choreographers on how they are responding to the social unrest of our time and practicing artistic activism. We have received some brilliant questions from our viewers that will be included in tonight's conversation. Please ask those burning questions in the chat, and we will try to get them answered at the end of the conversation live tonight. I am so excited to be joined by Wilson Mendieta, Rommy Sandhu, Lainie Sakakura, and Tommar Wilson. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks for having us. Hi.
I have a very humble background in musical theater compared to all of our guests, and I am looking forward to learning more about each of you, your unique experiences and insights being artists of color in this industry. First, I want to check in on everyone. Tell us where you're joining us from and how you're doing tonight. Lainie, let's start with you. All right. Wilson, let us know where you are.
Absolutely. I'm actually living in Southern California. My hometown is Long Beach, and then I'm currently working at Chapman University.
Amazing. Tommar.
Hi, I'm in Los Angeles. I moved out here in March for March 8th, right before the world shut down. And I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
And Rommy, where are you joining us from and how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, thanks for asking. And I am in the Big Apple. I'm actually in Queens, Woodside, Queens, in the Big Apple, and doing terrific, making our way through the world, teaching for Marymount Manhattan College, and working on other projects as much as you can.
Amazing. Thank you all for sharing. So to be on Broadway, you have to live in New York. Being a California native myself, I made the trek to New York at 20 years old to start my professional dance career. So I wanted to ask you guys, how many of you moved to New York to make it?
I think we all did.
I mean, all of the above.
Yeah, all of the above. I moved from California as well in the early 90s to make it.
Amazing. So I would actually love to hear from each of you. Why is it felt by so many that New York City is the center of dance in the United States and also the center of musical theater in the United States? Wilson, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, just the density of the city, the edge of the city, the conglomeration of all these different voices from different backgrounds is just a perfect petri dish for arts and arts innovation. And just it's always been kind of like the place to go where you you kind of feel like the outsider as an artist, right? Growing up, you're the odd child over there. And in New York, all of a sudden you find your tribe. There is a sense of everybody bringing something so unique and individual to the individualized to the table. And then you realize that you're not an odd person out. Everybody's an individual. Everybody's unique. And they're just kind of, climbing and walking and moving through the city and breathing all in the same kind of pace. It's just like the perfect combination for artists and dance, I think.
I love that. Lainie, what do you think? Also, I think we're having some issues with your headphones. Can you double check that they're plugged in for us? Doesn't look like we can hear you. While you work on that, can I pass the question off to Tommar? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think New York is, everything is so centralized in New York. There's so much opportunity. Whereas I'm from Kansas. I grew up on military bases kind of around the world. And in Kansas, there are very few opportunities to do theater and to dance. But in New York, you've got ballet, you've got modern companies, you've got multitudes of musical theater. So New York is kind of the place where you can go to get the most opportunity.
Yeah. Rommy, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with everything so far. I think New York really is a crossroads of the arts community. Growing up in Northern California, I had the opportunity to either move to LA to kind of pursue dance videos, late 80s, early 90s, or to do theater. And there were more opportunities for theater and dance and the like based out of New York, because the regional theater works its way out of New York as well.
Yeah. Lainie, I think we figured out your sound issue. Let's give it a try. What do you think? Doesn't look like we can hear you still. Oh no. Ah, shoot. Until we figure that out, let's move on to the next thing, okay? We'll make sure to get you in, Lainie, I promise. Are there any other cities that you visited or worked in that have thriving dance and musical theater ecologies? Rommy?
Actually, you know what? It's Chicago. Chicago really has a vibrant arts community, and much more so, I think, in the contemporary dance world. I think there's a lot more opportunity there because Hubbard Street is there. At one point, Joffrey was heavily based out of there. There's some really wonderful opportunities there. There also is it's a well, not right now, but pre-COVID, it was a pre-Broadway launch point. So even though they would bring in outside talent, there was still opportunity, I think, to be seen there. Boston certainly has some great, wonderful arts programs. BOCO is there, and other universities. Those would be two of my my favorite cities from my touring days of having gone through arts with museums and performance across the board.
You've also got a lot of there's the smaller markets like Milwaukee and Atlanta and to an extent
Minneapolis.
Kansas City. Yeah, Minneapolis, yes. Especially for musical theater and for some dance stuff. I think people tend to think that musical theater-wise, that's my background, that Broadway is the end-all be-all, but you've got all of this theater across the country that's doing, frankly, more creative and more risky things. So you do have. I mean, there are many that we're not naming. San Francisco. There's theater in LA. There's lots of places where great work is being created.
Yeah, because I think I'm sorry, just to piggyback on what Tommar is saying, is it really comes down to exposure, and some of the not smaller, but not as how should I say this? Not as commercially dependent on finance. They don't have to worry about selling a $14 million show. They can afford to be riskier and do really creative work, like Tommar is saying. In Milwaukee, I think there's some brilliant stuff happening in Atlanta and in Florida. There are a lot of great theater companies down there. All these little companies, I think when people leave the larger cities and they start to plant themselves where they feel at home, and they foster new gardens of the arts.
Lainie, let's see if we can get you back in. Yes, we can hear you.
We're still talking about New York, right?
Yes. Yeah, tell us about New York and then other places that have great dance musical theater centers.
Well, I'm from the Bay Area, and I moved out to New York. The first time I came to visit it, I just knew immediately this is where I wanted to be. It was I've never seen so many dancers or so many kinds of opportunities here before. I moved here actually when I was still in high school. My father came with me. I convinced them. They dropped me off. He dropped me off. I stayed in a Salvation Army's women's residence. I went to Joffrey, took classes, worked in all-night coffee shop, finished school through correspondence. Back then they didn't have online, kids. And and then, 17, I finished high school through correspondence, and then I joined Ballet Hispanico at 18. And then my career just started from there until I transitioned to musical theater. So I came here really because it had everything. I could do concert dance, I could do musical theater.
So my experience was being able to kind of take in the city while at the same time kind of have this experience of a suburban kind of all-American kind of dream life in many ways for somebody that was coming from out of the country. I actually thought I was going to go into computer science. I went to college and was taking all these calculus classes in my first semester. I went to see a show that the theater program was putting up, and it was called House of Bernarda Alba. And I saw this fantastic woman from Brazil, this young woman from Brazil who was in the program, just talk to me. And all these women who were just, we have this stereotype that men in Latin communities and culture kind of, are the bravo kind of machismo. But women run the house. They run the house. So to see that represented on stage for me was really eye-opening. I immediately switched my majors and started as an acting major. And then end of my sophomore year, I was doing tech work behind one of the dance shows. And when the curtain would come down, I would teach backstage all the girls in the dance program how to do salsa. And next thing you know, they're like, you got to come in and audition for us. Come. And I went, and they were so welcoming, and I was so in awe of these amazing, beautiful women. I declared a minor, and then I just went into concert dance right out of college. Actually, kind of what Lainie was doing. My last semesters, I was actually finishing my college work while I was in Hawaii and Singapore and all these amazing, crazy places. So the transition was mind-blowing, and I just fell in love with the life of an artist, and Shapoopy, that's where I landed.
Lainie, can you tell us more about your story?
Well, my mom is from Japan, and she immigrated here because a talent scout pulled her from Japan to take her into the nightclub scene of the 60s to be a singer there. And so she started learning to speak English and take dance at this dance school called Dwayne Dance Studio in Oakland. And so when I was born, I grew up in this little studio, and my teacher was a tap teacher who used to be a vaudeville tapper, and she'd tell me about all the movie musicals. But my mother put me in classical ballet at San Francisco Ballet. So I was at San Francisco Ballet all the time for those 8 years. But every minute I had, I would go and watch every movie musical. So I knew every movie musical there was. And then when I came over here to New York, like I said, I was always torn kind of between the concert dance and the musical theater thing. So there had been a couple of times when I was offered a show, but also offered a concert dance position, and I was always kind of torn. Actually, it was Elliot Feld that pulled me aside because I had just auditioned for Feld Ballet. And he said, you need to make a choice. And it was kind of the first time someone actually pulled me aside and really kind of sat me down about that. And I was like, you know what? I really like musical theater. So I decided Chris Chadman had a huge influence on me. He kind of, I would say, pulled the bun out of my hair, taught me how to not look so much like Katrina. And then my first Broadway shows actually were from open calls. This is before, whatever, agents and stuff. I just went to big open calls. So my first thing that I booked was actually two things at the same time: Carousel at Lincoln Center And then on the other side, Tommy Toon's Best Little House Goes Public. So I was workshopping Best Little House Goes Public when I got the offer for Carousel. So I said I wasn't going to continue on with Best Little House Goes Public, and I was going to join Carousel. And then I don't know what happened, but basically they said, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to do this show and you're going to have to leave Carousel. So I had no agent, had no nothing, and I won't go into all the details, but somehow I got pulled out of Carousel and I ended up in the cast of Best Little House Goes Public. I got pulled out like second week of rehearsals. So it was crazy. That was my first experience with Broadway. I was like, I didn't know what was going on. I was like, I think I was the only woman making my Broadway debut in Best Little House Goes Public because every girl was either in Crazy for You or Will Rogers Follies. So everyone had legs up to here. Like a whole new world. So it was like I was at Barbara Viterra's trying on like Bob Mackie, like rhinestones up to here. And then in the other minute I was in petticoats. So it was a very confusing time for me. That was my beginning and introduction to Broadway.
I love that. Tommar, let's learn about your story a little bit.
I want to hear more about Lainie. Like I want to see that movie of her life and her mom and all that. I want to see that movie. I started dancing by accident. When I was in 8th grade in Topeka, Kansas, I saw an ad to audition for summer theater. Went to the audition. The choreographer taught us a tap dance for the audition, and then I did it. She pulled me aside after and was like, how long have you been dancing? I was like, 20 minutes, like since you taught me that tap dance. But for some reason, like tap just made sense to me. And like, I don't know what it is, but it made sense and it didn't seem like a challenge. She was like, did you see no one else could do that? Like, so she gave me a scholarship. I started dancing with her studio. And then through high school, danced there and did lots of musical theater. In my high school, there wasn't a lot of counseling, I guess, in terms of like what to do after high school, at least for me. The only people that really spoke to me were my choir director and my acting teachers were the only people that ever talked to me about the future. And I didn't know anything about Broadway and anything. I didn't know that it was a viable profession. So I went to school for music education for a year. A friend of mine that I was doing a community theater show with basically said, hey, you should audition for this school, Carnegie Mellon. It's a great musical theater program. And I was like, okay. I had nothing to lose. Filled out the application, went to the audition, and got accepted and showed up not knowing anything about this program, which, would catch up with me because I was not prepared at all. So I went to Carnegie Mellon, stayed there for 3 years. I left for a year to do a production of the first national tour of Ragtime back in 98. And then I went back to school to graduate after those producers went bankrupt and left us in Minneapolis. I went back to school and graduated and then moved to New York. And my first Broadway show was a little show called The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, where I met Rommy. It was a huge flop that we were not prepared for. At least some of us were not prepared for. I was not a child, but a child in that it was my first professional experience. And I thought you could trust what the producers told you, that we were going to have jobs and the show was going to run. And the reason they weren't advertising in the city was because they were focusing other places. Meanwhile, the next day they tell you you're closing. So I got a really quick education in who to trust and what the business is really about. So on that sad note, that's the end of my origin story.
Rommy, tell us about your story. That's a great transition. You and Tommar work together. I love that.
Oh my goodness, yes. Rewinding back to, So I had a really kind of an odd start into theater as well. My parents had moved. I grew up in San Jose, California. My parents got a job. Both my parents are engineers. How I became a performer, I don't know. But they got a job up in Corvallis, Oregon, working for a tech company up there. So we moved up very, very quickly. And because I was so late to register for the middle school there, the last class available was a choir class. That was it. I had to fill the schedule. So I started taking choir class and I started to like it. While that was happening, I was really heavily nerding out on George Lucas and Star Wars and all those things. I mean, so much so that I wanted to work for ILM and do stop motion, and I wanted to be behind the scenes. I had no aspirations of being on a stage. So my parents introduced me to a friend of theirs in the local community theater, and I auditioned for Jesus Christ Superstar. I had no idea what an audition was. I just got up and sang a song I'm sure I forgot the lyrics to. I thought it was weird that I had to sing a song to build a set, because that's all I wanted to do was build sets. That was it. Like, give me a hammer and a nail, I'm good, just fine. So that was my first bug for performing. So we moved back to California, as you do, as you jump around. Then started back into theater in high school because, of course, as we moved there late, the last class available was the theater class. So I started performing with the theater class, and we had to take dance class and choir and all those things, and did that throughout high school and really fell in love with performing. I mean, as much as I loved doing the backstage at our high school, we had to do props or sets, and we had to do all those things. So I was performing there. Then while I was doing that, a friend of mine took me to the Santa Clara County Fairgrounds, and they had this program called the Entertainment Division, which was this youth-focused volunteer program where they would get local dance studios and kids to perform, like Holiday Fair, the Summer Fair. So I was I don't want to say dragged. I got drawn. I got drawn into that. From that program, I met my dance teacher, who wound up becoming like a second mom to me, and took me under her wing and put me into the dance studio for 40 hours a week. Dance, tap, ballet. I was like, I had no idea what was going on, but it was, oh, you're a boy. You can kind of sort of move. Come here. I mean, it's kind of an age-old story. But I really fell in love with it. So I got ballet and tap and modern, and back then we called it funk. We didn't call it hip-hop. Everything. And had to do voice. And basically it was my conservatory for 5 years. 40 hours a week, 5 years of doing everything. And then we took a trip to New York to go see Broadway shows. Every summer the studio would go for dance conventions back then. And I saw Jerome Robbins' Broadway, and it changed my life. I had never seen that many strong men dancing on a stage, telling stories and singing, and just, it was phenomenal. I mean, it was mind-blowing. So that cemented my love affair with New York. So then I moved to New York a few years later and pounded the pavement. And my first big job in New York City was doing A Christmas Carol at Madison Square Gardens. 60 people on stage, 90 minutes, 15 shows a week. Kind of the Radio City version of A Christmas Carol, but not Radio City. So that's my first big show. And then The Life was my first Broadway show. And that came from a connection I had with a choreographer I had worked in the regional theater market with. So that's my origin story.
Yeah, I love all of your stories. Thank you for sharing. I think a common thread through everyone's stories is being able to see yourself on stage, which, provides you that access point, that accessibility, that inclusion in pursuing things, and having people kind of change your perspectives and views on the art form itself, what is possible, what you can do with it, and how you fit in it. And I think that's so important for me and everyone else watching. So thank you for sharing all of that. So to book that Broadway show, you had to audition. To dive into the world of casting, does anyone have any cringeworthy or audition horror stories that you would be willing to share with us? Rommy, let's hear it.
So, and this is not to badmouth the director I worked with, who I adored. He has long since passed. A brilliantly wonderful man, and I'm not going to name his name. But we had to go through a series of auditions and do monologues and do scene work. And at one point, he stopped me in the scene and said, now, Rommy, what's the origin of that name? Is it Indian? I said, yes, it's Indian. Great. Can you do an Indian accent? I thought to myself, I mean, granted I was young, and this was early in the 90s, and I thought to myself, you mean, and then my brain clicked into Apu, which is not an Indian accent at all. But because I grew up, this is what my family sounded like. I mean, my grandmother had a slight Indian accent. Well, no, she had a heavy Indian accent, but I didn't grow up, talking in the stereotypical sing-song fashion. So that was a slight cringeworthy, but I mean, I did my best and I kind of sucked it up and didn't think anything of it because it wasn't a slight. It was a question, and that my only response was, I guess this is what you want me to sound like. I don't know. I mean, and granted, my aunt and uncle and my dad, full Punjabi Indian, don't speak this way, but that's all I could think of at the time. So that was probably, it's not really cringeworthy, but that was well, at least you see me as Indian, because a lot of people don't see me as Indian. I get Greek, I get everything else, Italian, Hispanic, blah, 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 blah. So at least I was like, oh, well, at least you were polite enough to ask me rather than assume. So there was a positive out of the awkwardness.
Anyone else have any stories to tell?
I'll share one that's actually maybe not exactly what you're looking for, but it was very cringy for me. The very first time I ever auditioned for an Asian specific show was The King and I 1996, which was actually my first big Asian specific Broadway show. But so since then I didn't go down that path. I was very much alone in all the shows that I did. But I walked in and I saw all these Asian people, again, like some open call, because I still no agent. So I walk into this big open call, and I was like, wow, look at all these, Asian performers. I'd never seen them before. I've never seen any of them before. And the first thing I hear in that waiting room was, oh, look, there's that token girl. So that it's interesting. So I bring that up because it's not always the people on the other side of the table that does it to us. And sometimes we do it to each other.
That is true. That is true. Were there, speaking of like those things that you were identified as the other, were there any times that anyone was in the audition room and you were the only person of color there?
So many times. I mean, like the first half of my career, I was the other in most of the shows that I did. And I think particularly in casting, there have been a lot of times that I've noticed, with agent appointments, you go in and you sign in and you see the names on the sheet, or you see the people sitting there, and I'm like, okay, it's a bunch of white guys and me. So, at first, I think in me being naive, I was like, oh, cool, they're seeing me for something different. They want to take a risk. Kind of after the 10th time of that, you start to realize, oh, the casting director is trying to do something creative, but the creative team is not going to go for it. So time after time, I like do the work and spend the time and spend the energy and spend the money. And then a writer or a producer says, we're never going to hire a black man for that role. There were times where I flew in for 2 callbacks for a Broadway revival of a show and flew myself in, my money, and then my agents told me that the book writer said, I will not cast a black man in that role. So, in hindsight, I see that I wasted a lot of time. In the moment, it felt good to be like thought of like, oh, they think I can do this. But, lots of people blame casting directors, and sometimes it's not the casting director's fault. Like the casting director might have a vision and say, let me put this in front of them and maybe convince them. But then that weight falls on the actor or the dancer to be like, if I don't make this work, I'm ruining it for everybody else, So it's a lot. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot of pressure. And that has been the story of a lot of my career.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, for me, it wasn't that I was the only ethnic person in the room. I think my accent kind of also kind of helped them put me in a category that was easier to manage for them in their headspace, which I'm fine with. I mean, it is what it is. But what was really interesting is that I found myself then navigating the audition process with a group of ethnic artists who were from completely different ethnicities, but they would put us all together in the same basket because we were of color, right? And in my career, I benefited from that because I didn't always just play the Latin man. I was playing other ethnic roles just because I fell under the umbrella of being ethnic. So that was one thing that I recognized very quickly in my audition processes.
And you become that becomes like that one track. Like all of these ethnic people are here for the one ethnic track.
It doesn't matter
kind of theme.
what that track is, right?
It does. It comes down to vision and what they see. I mean, Wilson and I did a show together, and when it was originally cast, I'll just say it was a show about India, and I didn't get cast. I was one of 2 Indian musical theater performers in the city, and the rest of the show was cast under an ethnic umbrella. So, I mean, we had some Indians from Canada, blah, 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 but we also had different nationalities that were brown. Because they, yeah, but, and yeah. Not a disparaging, I don't mean it in a disparaging way,
not at all.
But it is in how the creators then see that vision on stage. They just see brown. They don't even, not all of them, but there are ones that just see that. And it's a lesser vision, I think.
I think it's telling too. If you look at the shows I've done, I've only been in the original cast of a Broadway show. And I think that says something because unless I carve out the space for myself, I don't get a space. Because Asian is a funny thing because it's not even like we need an Asian person to fill that token spot. It's like, you know what I mean? Like I don't even fully fill out that, I have to make a spot, and I know things are different now and I thank God, but not as much as we need, far from where we need it to be. But it's hard because I get so tired. I keep saying my ethnicity isn't an accessory or a trend. And in around the 90s, we thought things were turning, right, guys? Didn't we? Yeah, we saw that Cinderella movie. We saw Whitney Houston. We saw, they were like, oh yeah, things are changing. Yeah, let's go. Yeah. And then I'm
bended like Beckham.
Yeah, and then I'm like, oh, all white Broadway show again. We're back where we started again. So this like comes and goes and comes and goes, So, I hope this time it sticks. I don't know, but yeah, I think, yeah. I've never been hired to replace anybody else.
Wow. For those that are watching that are interested in a career in theater or want to learn more about what happens behind the scenes, what advice would you offer to them or what changes to audition practices would you like to see? Tommar?
That's it. I mean, of course, that's like the big conversation right now, right? And I'm not 100% sure. We have this conversation about colorblind casting, color conscious casting, which are old terms that we all grew up with. But that doesn't necessarily help tell stories of BIPOC people. You can put a black or brown person as Maria in The Sound of Music, but if you're still gonna you have to play that role from the perspective of a white woman. No matter what, it's not telling this story as a black or brown woman in this experience, which isn't, musical theater is one of the only places that can happen because we're already asked to suspend our belief, because people are singing on stage. Movies are a little bit different because it feels a little more realistic. So that's a good question. And to not answer your question at all, I'm not 100% sure, other than telling more stories about and by BIPOC people.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
Yeah, Rommy, great.
Yeah, so I think we have to think of it as, we have to use the word commerce in it as well. And the people that write the checks, we have to find them. They're out there, but we also have to encourage those communities to write those checks, because it's not theater for free. I mean, as much as you know, it can be, it's still an industry, and an industry has to be funded. So whoever's writing the checks, unfortunately, calls the shots. There are people that write the checks that do have vision and do see us as a commodity, so commercially viable, but also sometimes actually listen to us and do value what we have to say and find the value, again, it goes back to value, in our voices. And hopefully beyond that, those people also believe in what we do as well. So we can tell, there is a suspension of disbelief. We can tell other stories. We can have color twisted casting, like Whitney and Cinderella and all these things. And we can do those because that gives vision to that child sitting in the audience to say, I can be the fairy godmother, or I can be Don Lockwood, or I can be that. There's no reason I can't play those roles. But while we're doing that, while we are on that diet of the dishes that are prepared, we also have to metaphorically open up the kitchen and let other cooks in to make more dishes. Yeah, it's like Hell's Kitchen in New York. We have a lot of great restaurants of diverse nature. We have Ethiopian, we have Indonesian, we have Chinese, we have Hispanic food, we have Thai food, we also have pizza and pasta. And we sample from everybody's palates, but we have to give room to everybody. And the people that write the checks, hopefully those are the ones that we have to encourage to do that, to support us as an industry.
Do you think, though, that we... oh, sorry, Wilson, go ahead. I already spoke. Go ahead.
To add to that, I think it's a sense of being able to recognize its cycle and what the entry point is. Because I feel like right now we're just kind of going in circles. And, this is conversations we had back in the 90s, like Lainie said, and even before that. And, this kind of conversations precede us, right? But here we are again in that same cycle and just running like hamsters without being able to just figure out how do we jump into that circle. And I think the main thing about it, and this became really clear for me because I actually was part of the cruise about, the show about Celia Cruz. And we did it in Off-Broadway. And that was really the first show where the material was telling stories of people of color for people of color. Not just putting a token person up there so that people go, ooh, a black person, an Asian person, a Latin person. No, we were telling stories that were for Latin people, by Latin people. And because of that, the audiences were packed. And we thought, oh, it's going to be a weird show. We're doing 4 shows in English, 4 shows in Spanish, which was, mind you, mind twist of, switching from a matinee into an evening show in languages, which is crazy. But all of a sudden, people were sitting in those audiences who were like us, the artists. So we were representative of them, they were representing us, and there was communication going on. So this idea of creating stories and maybe changing the conversation about the commerce of it is just about flipping of making those stories true, honest stories about people of color, and then reaching out to the audiences who want to see those stories, who recognize those stories, who can turn over to their moms and their dads and their children and say, yes, remember that happened to us. So let's stop pretending about, oh, let's kind of figure this out in a way where we can just put people of color up there and yay, we have arrived. No, tell the stories of the people. The people are ready to listen to them. So people will pay for the tickets, producers. People will pay for the tickets if you tell honest stories. Tell honest stories.
100%.
Bravo, Wilson. That was amazing. So we're going to transition now to our questions from the audience. We received some questions prior to the conversation, which we'll get in now. So this question is, what is missing in the musical theater industry from your perspective today?
Creativity,
anyone want to go first?
risk,
Okay, Tommar.
risk-taking and creativity. I think to what both Wilson and Rommy were saying, I think we put way too much emphasis on Broadway. Broadway is commercial theater. Broadway's never been anything but commercial theater. We're lucky when we get creative, artistic work on Broadway, because Broadway is about making money. I think when you look at off-Broadway and off-Broadway and what's happening in regional theater, you get more interesting, risk-taking musical theater. And I think the more we support that and the more we participate in work like that, the more commercial theater will want that, because that's how it works. They're going to want what the audiences are going to and what they can't have. So that's, I mean, I really think we have to take the emphasis off of Broadway being the pinnacle of creativity in musical theater, because it's not.
I would have to say, for me, I really want to see big changes at the top. So I want to see producers of color, artistic directors of color. I want to see those changes where the people in power, we're not always trying to justify why authenticity is important, why, casting, why I'm tired of still saying, really, you want me to do a ching chong voice, or I'm going to get on the next plane if someone tapes their eyes. I think that those conversations enough, and also even just, being just so glad and grateful that someone's not mad at you if you bring up an issue that's happening that doesn't sit right, that's just not right, that is wrong, but they don't notice it. It feels like it's always going to be the same argument, the same problem, unless we have more of us up there, holding the keys to the kingdom. So then if you open those doors, we can be anywhere. We could be on Broadway. We could be anywhere. We could be high-low shows. It doesn't always have to be experimental, small theater over here on the side, or that one. And I want to see that deeply rich, embedded in the stories, in the casting, in the creative, in the stage managers, throughout. I look back at my 30+ year career, and I can count on one hand how many people of color I have actually worked for, or women. Like it's unbelievable. So how can our voices really be truly heard? Because it's always going to be that wall that filters and decides what's important, what's going to make money, what people really want, so I'd like to see those changes happen.
And if I may add to that, I think, Lainie, I completely agree with that. And also make sure that us as people of color and artists of color, as they hopefully arrive at the place, be ready to with a clear voice. Because I have been fortunate to work with teams of who are people of color. And you walk into the room and it is so messy. It's so unnecessary struggle, because unfortunately, for whatever the circumstances, they arrive at those places, but they never had the information on what to do once they arrive at those places. So all of a sudden, people are up there trying to figure out how to survive, how to live, and they're just not able to grasp it. And so I think it starts at the bottom. It's just a huge landscape of symbiosis that needs to be we just need to get white-knuckled right now. Like, enough is enough. Just get white-knuckled and just go in there and say your things and be loud. And if there's no space for it, then seek the people and go create places somewhere else, because people will come. We want to hear stories of color.
Rommy, what's missing?
opportunity. It's definitely our stories. It's everyone's stories instead of just from a myopic point of view of uh, old stories. You know, Wilson has a story, Tommar has a story, Lainie has a story, I have a story. 20 years down the line, my kids are going to have stories. Let them tell their stories. And like Tommar's saying, it's going out and going into the regional theaters or the off Broadways where they are willing to take that creative risk. You know, like Wilson said, you got to bang on those doors. You have to have a clear vision of what you want to say so that you don't arrive at that point and spin your wheels. I've worked with a choreographer on Broadway who was given an incredible opportunity but didn't know how to structure a Broadway musical. Came from the contemporary world, and as beautiful as the choreography was, it didn't serve the piece. And he got slammed to the walls left and right because the director would walk in and go, nope, too dancey, nope, too dancey, nope, too dancey. And he was like, you know, sitting with his hand in his hair. So we have to, I guess we as the seasoned guard, our charge is to take the new recruits, for lack of a better term, the new artists, and teach them how to build. And then say, here's your hammer. Go build your thing. Don't build it my way. Build it your way. I'm gonna hand you a bucket of nails. I'm gonna show you where the wood is, but I want you to build it. And I think we need more voices supporting new future. Right? I think we are. I think there are enough of us that are riled up that are not satisfied with accepting the status quo. We see the new hungry ones, and our charge now is to empower them, to show them where the tools are, and then let them build structures to the skies, to the heavens, and tell their stories. Because we know how to tell stories, but a young Asian Indian boy is going to have a different version of life than I will. I grew up in the 70s in California being called a towel head. Thankfully, hopefully they aren't doing that because they have more of their community. But now they're more reinforced in their Punjabi, Indian, their Sikh stories that they can then tell their stories. But I can stand here and say, okay, let me guide you. Go, do it. I've scraped my knees. Here's how you're not going to scrape your knees. Now keep running so that we can cheer them and push them and push them and push them and not let them settle. Because I don't think any of us had, I mean, we did. We all had people pushing us from behind, right? But I think not enough because we stepped into a business that was, for me, outside of my family's realm. But now I can turn around to all those Indian boys that I see coming into dance class or audition and go, no, don't settle. Keep going. Believe in yourself. Push. Try it. And to be Debbie Allen with a stick. You want fame? Boom. And be tough on them. Because we can't mollycoddle. We will never build structures on spaghetti. You can't. You got to be strong. And we have to show them that we've got their backs. So that's what I want to see. I don't think it's missing. I just think I think we've got to turn that volume up.
Lovely. Thank you all for that. This will actually be our final question of the night. What are some ways that the theater can continue now during a pandemic, and what do you envision the future of musical theater looking like? Tommar?
I mean, I've seen some interesting Zoom pieces. I think everybody's still trying to figure out like what theater is in this moment. I think when we get back into live theater, that it will be smaller and hopefully more focused. I mean, it's going to have to be. It's going to, the price tags are going to come down. We may have smaller audiences for a while. Like I'm part of Hamilton right now, so you know, you can't run a Broadway show with a socially distanced house. It just is not financially possible. So for a while, like everything's going to have to scale down, and I think that's probably a good thing. We're going to focus more on stories, hopefully more diverse and inclusive stories, and not so much on spectacle for a little while.
Lainie, what do you think?
It's interesting. This time right now, I feel like it's given us maybe some time. You know what I've noticed a lot is when we did Fosse, it was the most expensive pre-production since Robbins. And it's been a long time since Livent and certain people went to jail that that we really took time to really work out shows like that. And I feel like, don't we always feel rushed? Like when I have to choreograph a show, I don't know if I've ever had more than 2.5 weeks in most recent years. You know, everything is fast. You know, even Broadway feels fast now. So I'm wondering if right now the best thing we can do is take our time and like go back to the craft. You know, work. You know, all young performers, don't just freak out. Everything stopped. It hasn't stopped for you. Go train. You know. Go work on your craft, work harder than ever. And then when things open up, come out blasting. You know, I'm writing, I'm working, you know. So I think time, yeah, it's a luxury that maybe we're always on that hamster wheel. We don't always have time to do. Maybe that's what we can do for theater right now.
I love that. Rommy?
Yeah, I totally agree with Lainie and with Tommar. I think time is the luxury that we're given right now. It's our gift. We have to stop. And there are open spaces to create. You know, we have laptops, we have music to listen to, we have skies to daydream into. And I think that's where our stories come from. When we get away from the rat race and the spinning hamster wheels, we afford ourselves daydreaming time. I look at my 10-year-old and sometimes I don't know what he's staring off into, but I know he's daydreaming about something because he's not rushing around to this and to the overscheduled life that we had pre-COVID. You know, so I think there are stories that we can dream up. I think young dancers, like Lainie said, you have studio spaces. Schedule out the time with your studio. Go in, blast that music to 11, dance your soul out, work on your technique, find your passion, videotape yourself, go back and watch it when no one else is, and see what you want to make better, where you think you're improving. Take that time and take the self time to do it. I think that's the best that I see for our artists coming up, is to take that time and use it.
Wilson, now and then looking into the future?
Well, hard to even add to what these amazing people just shared. I would say, I don't know, this is what I'm working on right now, and perhaps there's something in there. I believe the idea of working, the business of show, puts an emphasis on the external. There's a sense we are aware that whatever we do as artists, it needs to be viewed, right? Or it must be viewed, or hopefully will be viewed. So it's all about that outside eye. But in the process of that, and I believe I was feeling this as I was navigating the business, was that I was very concerned on, not all the time, there were places where it was nurtured by people where they shook me into realizing things, but I was aware of being bigger than the reach of my fingertips. I was trying to be grander than my existence, which I think is an important thing of an artist. However, I think right now we have the perfect opportunity to just bring it back internally. What is it causing in our internal systems? How is a thought, a move, a song, a line, a moment causing me to get flushed or swell up with tears or have sweaty armpits or shake? Those things are caused, I think, because of the internal. And I believe right now we have the perfect opportunity, especially for young artists who are working on their craft, to really look inward and figure out what is it about them that moves them, so that then they can share that. If we work on that and then figure out how to present it beyond our fingertips, I think that's the power of art making. That's the craft. That's the technique. So I would say that. I'm working on that as a teacher. I'm working on that as an artist. And I will let you know the next talk on how that went. How about that?
Absolutely. I will hold you to it. We'll talk in the spring and we'll see what's going on, new developments. That is actually our time for the day. Thank you all so much for your insight, for your wisdom, for coming to us with an open heart and open mind and just sharing of yourselves and your experiences. It's really insightful for me and really valuable as well as to everyone else watching. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having
Does
us.
anyone have any final thoughts or last words?
I am honored and humbled because this is Broadway royalty right here. These are people who have really made a conscious, effortful living as Broadway artists. I dabbled in that, and I was fortunate to come across amazing people like them and get to share stages and rehearsal rooms with them. So I just want to say thank you to these amazing people because you helped me realize my strengths and my weaknesses and how to bring them forth as a vulnerable artist. So thank you for that. People were listening, FYI. People were listening.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much for having us.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Lainie, Rommy, Tommar, and Wilson, thank you all so much. The Musco Center Creative Fund makes At the Musco Online programs like this possible, while also helping to fund the presentation of world-class artists, ensembles, and speakers on our stage in the future. Please consider donating at muscocenter.org. Please take a moment to tell us about your experience in the chat also. We would love to hear your feedback. On behalf of Musco Center for the Arts, the Department of Dance at the College of Performing Arts, and Chapman University, thank you for joining us at the Musco. We hope to see you soon. Have a great night, and remember, you are ever a dancer. Good night, everyone.